Thanks, Don. So this time last year, wasn't at the convention. It's one of the few I've missed in all the years because five of us were out there doing Christmas Island. And I particularly wanted to go to this one because I'd done T32, which is, of course, the other Christmas Island, or Kiribati. So what I'm going to do, though, is because it's a year ago and it's been publicised a couple I'll do a quick overview of the DXpedition. But the main theme is some of the lessons we learned from it. Some good, some humorous, and so on. So best laid plans of men, and, well, there's no mice, but we'll talk about that. Hand carrying stuff. This is the first time we ship things. FT8 Fox and Hounds. We were the third DXpedition to use FT8 Fox and Hounds, and so I'll talk about some of the experiences we had and where, some good and some bad with it. Top band 5 an hour can be fun. If you're top band, you're going to like this bit. And we also did the CQ Worldwide sideband contest, because we were there for that, from Zone 29, which is quite interesting. So first, a quick overview of the DXpedition. This was the fourth of the 6Gs group, and I think Don actually mentioned those before. So we started with Ravivi, Anhui, Chatham, and then Christmas. This was 5 of the 9 6Gs. Mathematically challenged. Gradually it's gone as a pool and people join. Tony was the newcomer to this group, but obviously we'd all worked with Tony before, so we knew him, and that was great. So this is the team that went, and we followed the normal way that we do 6Gs. We funded all ourselves. There's no sponsorship. Nigel does the QSOs tremendously, and Logbook of the World and Club Log every day, provided we got the reliable internet, which we did this time. Christmas Island is here for those. So our plan was to fly down to Perth using different routes. And then a few of us said, well, actually it was David that suggested it, is if you're going to Perth, down here is Margaret River, which is one of the famous Australian winemaking areas. So 4 of us went down there and spent a very enjoyable weekend sampling wines. And Nigel cycled round Fremantle and all sorts of other places, and we all met up back in Perth. And then the flight goes up to Christmas, across to Cocos Keeling and back down to Perth once a week. And also in the middle of the week, it goes the other way around. And it doesn't always fly reliably. Whilst we were there, the flights came in late. Well, it always comes in late. We were about 2 hours late. It came in late, and the crew were out of hours, so they had to stay on the island, which meant suddenly there was a whole bunch of people arrived for the hotels and nobody left. And so they have these panics where they've suddenly got to find 50 more hotel rooms on a small island. We found this location on the northern coast here of Christmas, and it is actually one of the biggest areas in there, Flying Cove, that you find in Christmas Island. And the place that we had was this hotel, Sunset Hotel, run by Angie, originally from Weston-super-Mare. Amateur friendly, other groups have operated from there, and she was tremendous help. We also rented, just go back. So we took a bunch of rooms in here. We had these 3 rooms up here and 2 down here for sleeping. And then this end one was one of our shacks. And we also rented this wooden studio cottage, I guess you'd call it, which we just pushed the bed to one side, and as you'll see in a minute, we put 2 stations in there. And that had a kitchen, so it was nicely self-contained, and that was our sort of communal area when we got together. The hotel had no catering, but there was quite a nice restaurant just a little way away, a Chinese restaurant that never really seemed to want to open, and the amazing thing about it is you can't really get coffee. And decent coffee is hard to get. We found a place that was about a 15-minute drive away to get a decent espresso coffee. So very strange, Australian culture, but no coffee. Here's the antennas, all verticals. We had elevated ground planes on all bands up to 80 and 160. They were ground mounted, of course. And all held up on spider poles. But because we were weight challenged, we were using multi-band, so two-band elevated ground planes that Mike G3WPH made. And I think that was in your talk 2 years ago, wasn't it, on that? So we'd used them before, worked a dream, easy to put up, two bands, just coming down to one coax. Obviously just select which bands. Stations, we aim to have we aim to have capability on all 9 bands, 4 stations with 3 always available. So kind of one was a spare, but at times we had all 4 running. Or as you'll see later, all 4 trying to run because of the conditions. K3S's, KPA 500, laptop, and the only difference was my Juma amplifier on the 8160 station. So these 2 here and the other 2 up in the other room. And so these are the stats, and they kind of sum up. We were operational for 12 days, and in our book that was a low score, 25,000. We had expected to get over 30,000. But there were some interesting stats in there. Actually, the next one's better. The one I always like to rate on a DXpedition is this one, the impact on Clublog, obviously, Clublog users, as to whether we gave them a new band, and you can see 43% of our QSOs, we gave someone a new band. New modes surprised me how low that was because we did a lot of FT8. So we thought digital modes we'd see more of. But overall, quite a good impact on people. And Christmas wasn't way up there. I think it was 76, something like that, when we went, in the 70s, 80s sort of number. The problem, of course, was propagation because, it was that time of year, plus the next bit I'm going on to, best laid plans. So one of the things you always do when you look at DXpedition planning is to see who's been there before and when and what the impact is. And this comes from Clublog, but I've taken out the, one man went there and did a holiday op and did 2,000 Qs. So these are the major DXpeditions. You can see big one here. Now this is two DXpeditions in the same year, but actually they were one after the other. And one was contest, so it was done in October and it was contest as well as DXpedition. 2014, a small group went in March and, I can't remember which one that was, but a big one went in October. Small group went in 2017, so, we figured this was a good shot. However, another group went in 2018 before us. And it was VK9XG. They announced after we had announced and after we booked our flights, which kind of isn't cricket really. They knew we were going. They operated 6 days, same QTH, and they finished just barely 2 weeks before we went out there. We were also saying we're going to do FT8 because no one else had done it from there. They did it, and as they've told us since, they operated automatically, so automated FT8 left running. They affected our QSO totals without a doubt because, anyone who wanted it could have got it off there. And they were quite a good signal, quite good operators. They did give us some feedback, and they did leave us some kit. But I think it is, I think the message from that is, you don't own the DXCC. Someone else can do that. You have no rights to it. You've announced. But, it's unfortunate that happened because it definitely did affect us. So that's the outcome of that. So this is us. We did work more than them, but then we were there longer than them. And but their QSO per day rate was higher than ours on average. And they didn't do the edge bands, which we did. Not that 10 and 12 really produced much, as I meant to comment on that. 10 and 12 were pretty useless when we were there. 15 was quite good, surprisingly. So it basically says you can do whatever you like, but it can get done. And of course, setting up something like this is quite expensive and a commitment, not just on the time of being away for 3 weeks, financial. So, that is something that can look at. So the second one is that because there was 5 of us, and because we were basically taking exactly the same as we'd taken before, we ended up with a weight problem. Now this is the kit we took. This is us at Perth, just about to go to Christmas. The flight from Perth to Christmas, getting excess baggage was pretty straightforward. We all bought 2 more suitcases. It wasn't a great cost, and so we had spare capacity on that flight. And of course, you have to pay for excess baggage. Everyone knows that now. But this was a challenge. This was the long haul. Well, this is actually all of our kit, and we compile a great big spreadsheet with who's doing antennas, radios, all these categories here. And you can see that station equipment, we carry the rigs, and I actually carried my linear, but linears are heavy. I mean, that's where the equipment is on check down. Poles, despite the fact we're using spider poles, if you're doing 9 bands and multiplying up, you end up with 17-meter spider poles, 12-meter spider poles, and we took 7 altogether. Coax is heavy. You've got to have low-loss coax. The M&P stuff that Martin Lynch sells is pretty light and pretty good. But we've got a stock of coax, so we took that. This is another one that's interesting, which is bags. Empty bags. Just the volume of stuff. You end up with 60 kilos of completely dead weight, which is packaging. And that's a problem. And miscellaneous includes, I don't know if you went to Nobby's talk yesterday, he talked about he could only take 5 kilos of personal belongings, and he had them in a bag. We try and allow ourselves about 7 kilos. And I was thinking, I've just come back from holiday with my wife in EA6. And as I loaded this 36 kilos of luggage that we'd taken for 2 weeks, I thought, isn't it interesting? I only take 7 when I go for 3 weeks. But of course, the climate's quite good there. So it was, it was touching 30 degrees when we were putting the antennas up, and it was warm at night. So, you don't need a lot of clothes. But it was cold in Margaret River. So you've got that sort of, what am I going to do? So we ended up here with 278 kilos, 0.3, just shows the accuracy that we go to. And the problem is that on baggage allowance, some of us were travelling business, some travelling World Traveller Plus. BA is quite generous, 96 kilos for business, 3x23s. Emirates called us out, because I've flown Emirates before down to Australia and New Zealand, and been getting more than that, over 50 kilos. Not quite as generous, but certainly. They cut down to 40. 3 of us were flying Emirates. The fare's a bit cheaper, but you can see here, they're looking at $50 per 5 kilos each way. So you've got $250 per case, times 2, because you're going to bring it back. So you've got $500 just to get an extra case, which is really starting to ramp up and make BA look more and more attractive. BA isn't too bad, but only Nigel was flying on BA, and he was already taking 96 kilos of kit. And then you get into the point about how do you actually handle all this stuff at the airport. So, and Tony flew on the QF7, which is the direct flight from London to Perth non-stop, and they really don't want any extra baggage at all. So it worked out that our allowance, putting everything together, was about 30 kilos short. And we tried really hard. We talked about whether we dropped a station, whether we dropped a band, what could we do? And so I started investigating, put together some papers and various other things as what we could do. Should we buy coax when we're out there and just leave it behind? Surprisingly, buying coax in Australia isn't that easy, and it isn't that cheap. You can buy stuff that's meant for satellites, and you can buy stuff that's meant for TV, but something in the middle that we would want, RG213 or stuff. We talked to M&P about shipping out there, but that's quite an expense because you're going to leave it behind. And we couldn't find a second-hand market for it in Australia. So the solution was to ship 2 bags. and we came across a company called Ship My Bag. I said it carefully, didn't I? And they deal. They basically they'll ship a bag anywhere per bag up to 30. Up to 30 kilo. No, it was up to. Up to 30 was the price. Yeah. So Mike packed these 2 bags to 29.5, and we shipped them. But the question then is, where do you ship them? And the answer was the locals, because anyone who's done top band will know Steve, VK9XG DXpedition. He's G3ZZD, as was. His father lived in Eastbourne, just along from me, and I knew him quite well, knew Ozzy quite well. I knew Steve before he went, and he's been out there. And Phil, VK6GX, another top band guy, FOCer as well. And so I just contacted Steve and said, could you receive these if we send them? And when we got out there, when we all got together, we went out to Steve's place. There were the bags. We all went out for a really nice Chinese meal. And in fact, we got on so well that when we came back, Phil hosted a barbecue for us, which was quite something else. The end of a DXpedition to go to an Australian barbecue where it's all done was great. So that's the first time we've ever shipped anything. And it's quite scary when you've shipped all your coax and you don't ship it too early, hoping it's going to be there when you get there, because if it isn't, you're in trouble, which is why we normally take it. Right, change subject, FT8. Now, as I said, we decided that we would do FT8 and no RTTY. And we also said, well, we're going to play Fox and Hounds. It had been released in the August. We went in the September, and KH1 had used it. And of course, the 7Q7 team used it, and Joe Taylor wasn't happy because he hadn't formally released it at that time. And the reason is that if you look along here, club log rarity, as I'm sure you're all familiar, this is the rarest bits, and data's rare. So we thought that's what we'll do. We'll bash that. We did a bit of just non-Fox and Hounds, generally to open up the band. Then we go to Fox and Hounds and find no one was calling us. And we realised that PSK Reporter wasn't, because obviously you change frequency to do that, you don't do it in the main FT8 channel, that PSK Reporter wasn't picking us up. So we learnt that what we would do is self-spot, and then also we would then just write a message, saying, now going Fox and Hounds on 70060 or whatever channel we chose. And that worked. And what we found is when we did that, we then went there and stations were already calling us. So this was the impact of it. As you can see, these are the 4 DXpeditions we've done. There's a number of conclusions you can draw here. Either we're all getting old, lazy and tired, or sunspots are killing us. And as I've said, we lost probably, we think, 5 to 7,000 Qs through the previous DXpedition, maybe 10. CW has been relatively the same through those, but SSB's dropped. And the simple reason is there is no propagation. You call CQ on sideband, even if you self-spot, once you've worked the GAAs, that's kind of it from that part of the world. But the data went up quite dramatically. These were all, these 3 were obviously RTTY, and this 20% of our Qs, so 5,000 Qs, were done on FT8. If you've not seen a screen, and most people won't have seen it if you're the Fox, this is what it looks like. So here are the stations calling us. Here, and you select stations from here into here. We didn't run automated mode, by the way. We did it all manually. So you can either just click and the top one will go down there, or in here, John G3WKL's in there somewhere. And so I would have probably selected him and put him in here, rather like you would on any other mode. You hear someone you know calling, you go back to them. So you put them into there. In this case, we're running, I'm working 5 stations at the same time. And they're a mix of Europeans, so there's PAs, HAs, probably can't read that, PAs, HAs, and a JA. And basically, once they're in here, the software does the rest. It works it. If it doesn't get the response within 4 calls, then it spits out, and then it has to go back in here. If I don't select them within 4 calls, then they drop off, and it has to restart, or they have to restart. So it's quite interesting to operate on that basis. You have to watch the time here, because here we're running a pretty good rate, because you're running 5 concurrently, so you've got a potential rate getting up over 200 an hour. But if the rate drops, you've got to cut down the number, and if you're calling people and they're not coming back, it's because you've got too many channels going out at the same time, and so on. So you're continuously varying this to get the maximum rate. The interesting thing about it is I've done two analyses that I thought would be quite interesting. One is I looked at, across the 5,000 queues, I looked at the received signal to noise at our end. So this is, and we had a pretty quiet location. I mean, we had some QRM, local QRM, that was a lighting system that we didn't get to fix. We wanted to switch it off, but they said you can't, it illuminates the stairs. And because we'd gone light, we were running out of ferrites, sorry. So this is the, along the bottom here is the received signal to noise, and the histogram is the number of stations we worked in that range. And here is 0 dB signal to noise. Now, remember that FT8, it is the signal to noise in the bandwidth. So if you've got the bandwidth out to the edge of your filter, 2.8 kilohertz, whatever, it is the signal to noise in that bandwidth. So so that would be like sideband. So anything above here, you would work on any mode you care because you've got a positive signal to noise. Below here, sideband would be difficult. CW would be fine because you would just bring the bandwidth down, and as we know, that's a square law, so you would be working down here. Some people will claim they can work down to sort of minus 18 dB signal to noise. The problem with that is it's all very well under controlled conditions, but if I go back to this slide, there are 21 call signs there calling us all the time. We're working 5 of them. There's 5 in the stack, 5 or 4 in the stack, and the rest are calling. So they're all calling. So actually, if you were on CW, that'd be like having 20 people call you in there. And so there is a debate as to how far down you can go. But a simple thing to say is when you're below minus 12, so this minus 12 to minus 24 band, probably those wouldn't have been workable on any other mode with a pile-up. So if you look at those two together, there's somewhere around about 1,600 QSOs in there, 1,600 QSOs that we might not have worked on any other mode at that time. And what we found was that actually we would call CQ on CW, no spots, we'd go on to FT8, not much, then it would open up. So as a low signal, we found it very useful. The second analysis was how many of those 5,000 QSOs, not stations, QSOs, did not work us on any other mode? And the answer is about 40%. So we had 2,000 queues, 10% of our total QSOs only worked us on FT8. And I'll probably do some more analysis sometime to look at that and say, do we know why? Was it the time of day? Was it the band? Was it where they were? Were they weak signals? Were they sideband operators who couldn't work us on sideband, didn't do CW, so they came there? Or did they just want a data mode? But it basically says our findings, afterthoughts. And of course, FT8's moved a huge way in the last year. And FT4 is probably what's going to happen in the future on DXpeditions because you always want rate. So basically it says it allows QSOs on seemingly dead bands, increases distance workable. There is very little connection with the QSO. And best of all, you make a cup of tea whilst you're waiting, put 10 in there, walk off, do a crossword, take a comfort break. And that is quite difficult to get used to when you're in a DXpedition. Right, top band, 5 an hour can be fun. Now, the thing about top band, about Christmas is it's rare on top band. Most places are, but it's particularly rare on top band and particularly rare to North America. And we had quite a lot of requests from the Americans who were saying, we need you on 160, we need you on 160. So we had a 17-meter top-loaded T and 2 receive antennas, an FO0AAA loop, which you can just about see here, and then we put out a 600-foot unterminated beverage. Now, if you do DXpeditions, then you get a fairly similar pattern to this. Day one, all the big guys work you because they're waiting, they're there, big signals. You could almost fill the log before you went. Then you get what I call a weekend effect, and another weekend effect there. So you get that sort of pattern to it. But what was interesting is we wanted to work North America. And so this is the headings we had for North America, and it's probably better on here. This was our takeoff. And so we had a bit of a problem to the west coast, but it's a bit nearer. The east coast, further away, but we only had a fairly narrow overlap of grey line for the east coast every day. And it's a shame this doesn't come out. This is a fabulous picture. This is sunset, and so the time was sunset every day. And we said we will dedicate the top band, that station to top band every night. Come what may, listening for North America. That's what we'll do. So we did. So these are the days we operated top band, and along the bottom is going to be the date, and then the number of North American QSOs we made. None. A few more. That was the weekend. Look at that. Now, most people know on top band there might be one magic day, and 24th of October 2018 was the magic day to North America. And I'd done a number of these slots, and it's pretty depressing because you just don't hear anything. I mean, the noise level's low, there are no stations there. And you work a few others, but you want to stay North America, you're calling CQNA. We were monitoring KST as well, and people were saying, can't hear you. And this night, it just went berserk. And it lasted 4 hours, which is the amazing thing. And this is the QSO rate every 5 minutes during the opening. And you can see there's whole blanks here where 20 minutes you don't make a QSO. There's nothing there. I actually stopped around here. I handed over to Nigel here, partly because my adrenaline was so high, but also because I thought the opening had finished. And I thought, I needed a break, and that was it. And at times we had, buddies on headphones listening. You'd get part of a call, you get a call, you go back to them, they wouldn't come back. 5 minutes later, you'd work them. Classic top band stuff. But what I thought was, well, it'd be interesting to see where they were, because we wanted East Coast. East Coast was the most wanted. So this is locators. So I put all the locators of the QSOs we had, the 48 QSOs. I put them all into, from QRZ, put it into here. And then I noticed there was a number of people on the East Coast we worked in broad daylight. So I emailed them, and you probably can't see it, but up here, 7 of our QSOs were in one square in Seattle, where there is a very nice remote station. And they owned up. They just said, oh no, I was using a remote station over there. So, one of the ham, what do they call it, the ham radio ones you combine to. Yeah. So that's fine. As I said, I'm not worried about that. I just want to do this for the analysis. So then I thought, well, there were a couple in here. So let's have a look at, was it classic grey line propagation? So here is the grey line at the opening, 11:05 Zulu. And we're down here. There's the East Coast. So if I zoom in on the East Coast, at the start, the grey line, I hope you can see that, the grey line is running through here. So I thought, okay, so what I'll do now is I'll plot it on here, and I'll run the grey line map and see if it is true grey line propagation. Yep. And it's interesting because when you're operating, you really don't have that clue. You just can't see it. But as it goes back, and I'll just run it sort of backwards and forwards again, it's quite staggering how the early ones were the big stations, by the way. You just see it going through. And you imagine at the other end of that QSO, there's someone else getting just as excited as you are. And those are the stations we operated, that we worked. But there's an interesting point. I gave that bit of the talk at the Visalia Top Band dinner, which is kind of preaching to the converted. But afterwards, I was talking with George, AA7JG, and he had gone to, he'd been on Baker Island, and he said, you're absolutely right. On any one top band, on any one, in a DXpedition, any one night will be the magic night. And your question is, are you going to be on CW or FT8? Because most DXpeditions alternate now, CW and FT8. So which mode are you going to be on? And he said, we had the solution. And he showed me the block diagram of what they did. They had 2 Flex, on Baker, they had 2 Flex 6700s, and they were diplexing into the same antenna, running 200 watts of FT8 and 800 watts of CW every night on top band. And when you look at that, anyone who knows building filters for top band and doing that when you're, the frequency difference is quite something, and that's where I think it's going to go. I think serious top band events, you're going to have both modes in band every night to make sure, because there will be people who want it on CW who won't do FT8, and vice versa. So that was the magic top band opening. That was probably one of the most exciting evenings I've had on top band for probably since I worked W1BB. And some of the guys are in here, and they'll attest to how great it was. And you don't get many of those in your contesting career. So then the last bit, just to wrap up, and this was so far on this, we've had a couple of difficult things. FT8 was a good learning experience. Every single one of us did FT8. 3 of us had done it before, and David and Tony hadn't, but where they were press ganged into it, and they enjoyed it, didn't they? No. But we've always done RTTY, we've always done that, so we'll be doing FT8, FT4 in the future. But we also, when we were there, we were umming and ahhing, shall we do CQ Worldwide sideband whilst we're here? And it was at the end of the DXpedition, and things have been going okay and doing this. We said, yeah, let's do it. Now the interesting thing is that we looked at it, and the all-time score records off before we went showed that there was this big group down here that had done a thing in 2014. That was on the graph. They held that record, and multi-multi we could have done easily, and we thought, well, there's never been an entry for multi-2. We didn't particularly want to do multi-1 low. I mean, that really is pushing your luck, isn't it? So we thought, okay, we'll do multi-2, and 4 of us between us did it, and we kept 30 meters running on other modes and various things. We dedicated one of the shacks to it, and we did it. And the problem is, none of us had done it from Zone 29 before. So you're sitting here. So Europe you can see is across here, and we knew we could get into Europe, so that's okay. The US is difficult on, that's a difficult path on all the bands. But you've got all those JAs down there to work, and they're all on your doorstep, and you think, well, that'll be good. But as we know, JAs don't do quite as many sideband contests as they do CW because of the language difficulty. But nevertheless, we thought, okay, so we've got to do that. Now, here's the challenge. Those of us that do this from Zone 14, what happens when the path opens to America on the HF bands? Everyone turns their beams to the US. Turn your beam west, work the States. Where are we? We're off the side of the beam now. So we could hear all those loud stations in Europe, and they couldn't hear us. Calling CQ was largely a waste of time. So we were searching pounds. But then when I looked at it afterwards and analysed the QSOs by continent, so easy sort of stuff off a logger, you can see that South America's there. North America, 2%. That's all we did of our QSOs. We made 1,500 QSOs. That was another interesting thing. We said, look, we've only got to make half a dozen QSOs, and we got the record. But then we kept moving our targets and saying, well, let's do 500. And then we did a point score, and then we did that. And so we kept going. I don't know how many hours we actually operated. I can't remember that altogether. But, it was hard work. There's no doubt about it. But I'll come to a big plus in a minute. So, obviously, Asia was big. But look, 45% came from Europe. So we actually were breaking into Europe, but it didn't feel like it at the time. So then you look at the zone analysis, and I was quite surprised at this. Zone 14, 15, 16, we were doing quite well into there. So those OHs and stuff, but around there. So, and then when we got back actually to Perth, and we were talking to the VK6s that were saying at the barbecue, they were saying, yeah, that's what it's like. Nobody listens for us. No one turns south. Why would you do that? You can just run all you want to the US and get the points, whereas coming to us. But, oh no, I'll come to that in a minute. But so we ended up, we first in Christmas Island. Amazing. No one else was there. But we were first in Zone 29, which was quite interesting, because I didn't think we would do that. Third in Oceania. Well, world wouldn't count at all. The big thing here was this. When you searched and pounced and you found someone, and you could almost see them going through the process, VK9, and when they got to the X, obviously pumped up as double malt, because, you know, Zone 29, Christmas Island, double malt. You could hear it in their voice. VK9XG, and thanks for the double malt. And that was, you know, that was actually quite rewarding and quite incredible. In fact, Tony had an experience where on 80 meters he worked someone, it was no end, wasn't it? And he said, "Do you want my frequency?" Yeah, and they kept the Europeans out of the way. Now it was a smallish run, but it worked. So there we go. There's our certificate. Look at that, Christmas Island record. Another one for the thing. So if you're going again, there's still a multi-one low record to be set. So, you know, I mean, basically we ended up doing a pretty good score, actually. I mean, that, you know, you'd have to go there to do it to equal that score. You won't do it casually. So it was good fun. And I think, you know, the point was we knew we were down on QSOs from what we were doing, so there was that bit in there. And this really sort of perked up towards the end as worth a few more beers. So there we go. So it was a little bit of a ramble around all the DXpedition and the lessons learned. And of course, we'll feed those all back in, because I'm sure you're going to ask me the next one, where's he going next? Well, I can tell you that we've just had a lunch meeting of the 6Gs. And we haven't decided. So thanks very much.
Any questions?
Where are you going next?
You don't listen, do you? Listen.
No, the answer's
There's always
you can be bribed.
Ah, yes.
There's always one. Where do you need?
Oh, don't ask that.
P5.
P5, yeah.
Yeah.
Or three-way.
And
To be fair,
Tony, you can.
to be fair, the 6Gs. Hang
I
on.
was going to ask you a question.
Is there any history behind the shacks that you used?
I think, Tony, you know the answer to that. Yes, because the captain's last resort, this sort of wooden cabin, or wooden brick cabin, used to be the abattoir. Sorry, the morgue. And well, we won't go into details, but
The place we stayed in was a hospital, wasn't
yeah, that was a hospital, and this had been the morgue where, you know, they laid the people out. Not a bad place to be laid out, really. I mean, in the end, but you wouldn't know, would you?
Yeah, no wonder the bands were down there.
Oh. If you didn't get that, he said, no wonder the bands were dead.
Chris, is this the end of Ritty and PSK on expeditions?
I think so. I mean, my view is, it comes back to the point. If you want a DXpedition for an all-time new one, you're not going to say, well, I'll wait until they're on FM because I like FM. You're going to choose the mode that gives you the best chance of getting through, and that is going to be FT8 if they're doing it, or FT4. And then you might go to CW. So in the hierarchy, you'd always go for CW first, and then fill in with other slots and bands and whatever. Now I would suggest that the DXpeditions should be starting and running FT8, FT4, day one, all the time, one station. And I know that's controversial, but the point is, for the people who want it, if they're happy to accept a digital contact as their first one, then that's it. And I think, you know, I've got fairly strong feelings about, I don't particularly like digital modes. I'd much rather have the QSO on CW. But there's a whole bunch of people out there who say, yeah, but that's because you've been licensed 50 years. If you were licensed this year, you wouldn't think that way. So I think we've got to move on. So that's that's not 6G's policy, by the way. That's my personal view. But I can't see the point of doing RT21. Very few did PSK anyway. It's a digital mode, and unless ARRL separate it, and they show no signs of doing that, then I think you may as well work FT8.
Any more questions?
That's made it go quiet.
Very quiet.
I thought the ARRL was actually banned on the DXCC.
Sorry, repeat it.
Graham G's here, MBD. I thought the ARRL has banned FT8 or FT4 as a contest.
No? No, this is DXpedition. What they've said, the latest ruling is you must have, what's the exact wording? But basically, you've got to have a person at both ends. You can't leave two stations working each other automated.
They
Yeah.
won't allow fully automated, so as long as there's somebody pressing a button occasionally.
Yeah, that's their latest ruling.
How
And,
how they check that? But I mean, that came about because there was an expedition recently that said they were going to leave a fully automated station running on FT8 throughout the expedition, and that raised a few eyebrows. And
Yeah.
the ARRL's reaction was, no, somebody needs to be there with a finger.
And what would happen, of course, is if you were suspected of that, you wouldn't get the DXCC credit for your DXpedition. That's serious. So I think they're forcing it to make it happen. Whether the guy at the other end is there or not, no way of knowing. But yeah, no, they haven't banned it at all. Yeah, remote operation. I mean, there's a big argument on that. Yeah, I mean, if we get an Italian call us in the middle of the day, his day on 160, we will not work him. It is just wrong to do that. He's clearly operating remote. Another station. I didn't pick an Italian just because I could give you the call signs that do it. But the point is, you can't. You just can't do that. And there are a number of people who are doing it. And yeah.
So how long is it going to be before we see a station left on Bouvet Island running QSOs 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, and replenished every couple of years? Yes.
Never, I hope.
Right, I think looks as though we're done. Chris, lots to think about. Obviously, an interesting trip. Some memories, if not the number of QSOs that you were hoping for. And I appreciated it, and I hope the rest of us did. Thank you.
Thank you.